Wheel of John are the show for readers who have already yielded on more than one account. Truth be told, we long to yield. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different author, story, or idea, and right now we are reading Gnostic Fiction, including this short story, Jorge Luis Borges' Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis, Tertius. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in, the layers of this story. I've read it a few times now, and I always discover some new layer of complexity and ambiguity, and I'm amazed how this is all juggled without it ever feeling like it's a hard story. You know what I mean?
Once you pop, the fun don't stop. I'm Bob. I'm interested in the horror of mirrors. The horror of mirroring, similar to layers, but how things refract and reflect and just keep producing themselves.
Yeah. Well, gosh, how many Borges have we covered? Is it only one? Have we only covered the Immortal so far?
Yeah, we did the Immortal, yeah. But we've both read some more other than that.
It's been like, it's been at least 15 years for me since I've read a lot of Borges. So it feels like I'm rediscovering him in a really fun way as we, kind of go through these stories and see more and more of him. By the way, I don't know if listeners can hear that, but there's construction happening right outside my window. So later I'm going to try to edit out as much of that as I can. But, that's how the cookie crumbles today, I guess.
I don't think you're getting that out of there. That's pretty loud. Ding, dinged. Okay.
So reading this one, I guess we've already covered a lot of Borges' life, but something I was really interested in while researching this was the blindness of Jorge Luis Borges. I think something maybe we haven't talked about this too much before together is how at the end of his life, he totally lost his vision. There's a really good YouTube video. It's a documentary called Profile of a Writer, Jorge Luis Borges. And in addition to interviews and footage of him, it also has people like reenacting parts and pieces of different stories. But he has this really interesting thing to say. He says he knew that he would die blind because his father died blind and his grandmother and grandfather before him. I thought that was really interesting, just as like something hanging over yourself for your whole life, knowing that you have this thing in your family that's degenerative. It's coming, but you don't know when. And he says that first black and red were lost, but he still had green, blue, and yellow. And then green and blue blended together, and he was left with only yellows. Now he lives in the center of a luminous gray mist. He says, quote, "My friends are faceless. Women are just as they were years ago. One street corner is taken for another. On the pages of books, there are no letters." And I don't know, there's something really self-mythologizing, in a really interesting way, like this tragedy, this disability that he's going through. Somehow there's like a Borgesian spin that he's managed to put on it. It feels like he's made himself into a character in one of his stories.
And one of the most important things to him, books and writing, to have the letters no longer appear in the books. That sounds very Borgesian. I know eventually he was dictating a lot of his stories too. So he would, I think, be in his office with someone writing down everything that he said as he made his different stories. And that assistant would also read stories to him. So he kept going even as he lost his sight.
The dictation aspect is really, really interesting because, it's not a theory I have, but maybe just kind of like an observation that the way this story is written doesn't seem to me to have the same like kind of character as your average fictional prose. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel like a story that I'm being narrated to. It feels more like a list to me, or like an enumeration of various different things, various different bullet points. And I don't know if this was written before the time that he started dictating his stories, or, how we can fit that in. But there is something very spoken about this story that I think is really interesting.
There's a book that's coming out, I think in July, I think, that might be wrong, of this year, that is based on a lot of Bioy's letters and diary entries all about Borges, and I think it will just be called Borges. So that'll be an interesting book to get insight into everything that's going on in his life at the time. But yeah, this story, let's hop into the story. I think there is tons of layers, as you have said. There are so many references to other just things outside of the story that really exist, and there's things that are within the story that don't exist, and the line becomes constantly blurred between fact and fiction, or characters talking about the story versus characters who are actually deeply involved in creating the whole fiction within the story. And even that doesn't, what I just said doesn't make any sense, because the whole story is always just it's like a quilt, some sort of crochet thing where the different layers are not just layers, but they're also weaving.
Before we try to break down the structure of the story, though, maybe let's think about the different layers. So you could see the story as narrated by Borges himself. And he talks about himself and his friend Cazares, who, this is the same boy, Cazares, who wrote The Invention of Morel, who we will cover next episode. But we have this world of the story that this takes place in. And then we have the world of Uqbar, which they only read about in a dictionary, or rather an encyclopedia, and then later in another larger volume describing this world of Uqbar. And then from there, you have the world of Tlön, which is a fictional universe inside of Uqbar. Is there any other layers to this that I'm missing here?
There's some other layers too, but I think Tlön and blindness are lands or kind of universes, and then Uqbar is a land or region inside of Tlön. But we're introduced to Tlön through Uqbar. So at first, it does feel like Russian nesting dolls, except for one doll is actually.
There is one other aspect, which is at the third part of this, the postscript. It then says everything that came before this appeared in an anthology of fantastic literature. Mm-hmm. So I guess from that, it's not explicated clearly, but I think we're supposed to understand that to mean that parts 1 and 2 are entirely fictional. Like it's a fictional short story that was written, but now we've jumped back to reality, which is like a reality above this world of Borges and Cazares discovering things in encyclopedias.
Well, it's also 7 years after it was published, too. The postscript is 1947, but the story is published in 1940. So even that's interesting because they're looking back on the story. So it is layers upon layers upon layers.
A beautiful literary parfait. Well, so how do we even begin to talk about this story? What really jumped out to you as interesting?
There's two things that I wanted to kind of look at. I read 2 academic articles, and a lot of them kind of went over my head, Zach, but I thought I could read some of what they were talking about, and they were suggesting that this might be a cautionary tale. Both of these independent writers seem to be going in the same direction. So one is called Tlön and the Philosophy of As If by Alejandro Riberi, and the other one is by Carrie Pierce. It's called An Unnatural History, Borges, Tlön, and the Myth of the Self. And they both come to this idea of as if equaling it is. They phrase it slightly differently. So Riberi says, hypotheses try to eliminate contradictions. Fictions, on the contrary, call logical contradictions into existence. And so they make as if become equal to it is. So you have hypotheses that you should be trying to eliminate as you try and build a reality, but in this case, it's fiction, and you can go in any direction that you want. And then Carrie Pierce says the same thing, except she uses slightly different language. She says that, to her, she says it's a cautionary tale because id est, the Latin for it is, has become synonymous with als ob, als ob in German, however you say that, as if. So she's saying that it's a cautionary tale, potentially because that line that Borges puts in there saying, look, people have become so obsessed with Tlön that our reality has caved in. And he said, 10 years ago, any symmetry, any system with an appearance of order, dialectical materialism, anti-Semitism, Nazism could spellbind and hypnotize mankind. How could the world not fall under the sway of Tlön? So I think these two writers looking at this story are trying to focus on that bit of saying, look, if we only take a fictional avenue towards a system of thought, and if we don't kind of not scale back, but look back to see in what direction it's going, it could just completely get out of hand. And then the fiction just kind of continues to fictionalize itself until we're so far removed from anything human. It's something anti-human like Nazism or anti-Semitism.
I'm really taken by this idea of as if statements or hypothesi, different hypotheses kind of stacked on top of each other. And it made me just now think of something I saw him say, which was like, in a fantastic story, he said, you need to have one fantastic element, and really only one fantastic element, which would be like his example was in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, you have invading Martians. Meanwhile, in The Invisible Man, you have an invisible man. But if you have a story that has both an invisible man and invading Martians, well, suddenly it's ludicrous, right? So he says that you need to have one thing that's absurd. And I heard him say that, and then I reread this story, and it kind of strikes me that like he doesn't really seem to follow his own advice in this story. It seems like, to get back to this idea of lists, it just seems like a grab bag collection, like an improv theater full of just different absurdist dreams that he's kind of just laying down on the paper, one after the other. But he takes them all as true, or he presents them as like possibly true. And by that, I mean like the statements that he makes, the descriptions that he gives are either like, this is how it is, and therefore, or it's either A or B, but I'm not telling you which or which. You're kind of hanging in this suspended state of, what is it? Ambiguity. I think that's the word I was looking for right there. You're in a state of ambiguity, but he's not there to tell you to resolve that ambiguity. He's there to just kind of like leave it and then continue on with these hypotheses.
Keep that wheel turning of ambiguity. This is where it really feels like Gnosticism and why it's an appropriate story for this run. It reminds me a lot of A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay, because in that we were thinking, okay, are we going through different cities and different regions to learn a philosophy to then be better able to handle this world? Or are we going to cast off, preconceived notions and, like scales off of our eyes, see more clearly, peeling back layer after layer after layer? Because he, in enumerating all of these different doctrines happening in Uqbar, he talks about philosophies that have, caught fire basically in this country and that have become so popular. So like dialectical materialism, he has Berkeleyan kind of ideas of the brain and the vat. Eventually they have this idea that there is no identity, that everyone is one great being. So there is no plagiarism, because you are writing and anyone who is not you who is writing actually is you, because you're all one being. And eventually he says all of these doctrines that have caught up, they keep kind of getting changed a little bit, or they're happening in this world, but also they're being invented by people who are referred to as demiurges at one point. So while there are things that are happening that exist in this world, they eventually get cut. For one example, one of my favorite things was the Hronir. And Hronir is an object that seems to just reproduce itself, but it's an object that can reproduce itself, and that reproduction can then reproduce itself up to like the 11th time, and then it disintegrates. But in later editions, they cut that out because they realize it's too strange and it doesn't fit with our reality, or at least the reality inside this story. And as this the Tlönian mechanics, or whatever it is taking over our reality, it had to at least be acceptable enough that no one really batted an eye. It just slowly started to take over. And we find that out 7 years later in the postscript.
I think that this, to go back to this idea of demiurges, I think he calls it like demiurge guy. Speaking of pluralization schemes but for me, like, that was the word that really kind of made click for me what it is that I would connect this to the other kind of Gnostic fiction books we've read, which is the fact of a constructed universe. It is, but it's not something made by one person. It is a constructed universe, apparently, that we speculate has been crafted together by specialists of all of these different disciplines who are coming together to create a internally consistent rules and laws that can govern this imaginary world, but one that's so imaginary, it starts to colonize our own. And it's kind of flipping, I think, it's flipping Gnosticism on its head, I think. With most branches of Gnosticism, the idea is like, we are the people who are inside of the created world, and there is a creator up above or somewhere else, and we merely suffer to live inside of their creation. With this one, the idea is, no, now a group of people are going to create their own minor universe. It's like, I don't know. It's not a perfect fit, but it's like an interesting remix of the idea.
It made me think a lot about when we talked about Philip K. Dick and the different ways that you see a crack in the reality that caused him to believe that there are many layers of reality, and you can scale up, not scale, that's not the correct word. You can either go up or go down in universes that are better and universes that are quite worse. And so he gets glimpses of universes that are quite a bit worse and wants to get up to the higher ones. But these intrusions that happen in this story, they reminded me a lot of that, of the idea of one day you come to your light switch and it's just not there. It's on the completely other side of the room. That should show you potentially, okay, something is being programmed and I'm just inside of this program. But these intrusions I thought were so interesting because we've been told so much of Tlön coming more and more to life. We almost kind of are spellbound or hypnotized by reading these encyclopedia once we find the more official versions in the postscript in 1944 when they find 30 volumes or something like that? No, 40 volumes. The first encyclopedia of Tlön in a Memphis library. So they're going through them. And it becomes so real for the reader, as it is for the people who discover these things, that these intrusions become kind of shocking because it's felt like we've gone into a fictional world that is very big, but now there's just this sudden evidence that it has actually, these thoughts have become objects. They become real actions. Not actions, they become actual objects in the world. So the first one is this princess. She gets a package in the mail, and it says, among the pieces, trembling softly but perceptibly like a sleeping bird, there throbbed mysteriously a compass. So she has all of these things that she expected to get, but then she has this compass, and it's pointing magnetic north. But the really strange thing is the letters on the dial belong to the alphabets of Tlön. So suddenly, in this fictional world, which is supposed to be a stand-in for ours, it's supposed to be reality, at least as far as this is set up. And now this compass that existed in this completely fictional place has just materialized. That's pretty terrifying, I think. Even though it might turn Gnosticism on its head, it does feel like if we make computers that are so powerful that they can create, and we'll look at this with Invention of Morel potentially, spoilers potentially, but anyway, if a computer can make something that is based on a fiction and then appear in reality, that's a little bit frightening. And the second intrusion is the man who's dying and just screaming at the middle of the night. And so Bioy and Borges hear him, and eventually the guy dies, and they go and look at him, and he's dropped all of these coins. And in one of the coins is this like a little pyramid, basically, that if you pick it up, it's a cone so heavy that they can barely lift it up. And it's probably only about this big, it's a little, like a die, the size of a die. But it's a metal that is supposed to exist only in Tlön. And that was quite shocking too. These things that just suddenly show us that Tlön has become so powerful, it can choose when it appears.
It's life imitating art, as the phrase goes, but you mentioning Philip K. Dick got me thinking about other examples of this, which I think, I wasn't thinking about this before, but he has that story, Flow My Tears, the policeman said. And in one of his essays, let me check. In his essay, How to Build a Universe That Doesn't Fall Apart 2 days Later, we read it in The Shifting Realities of Philip K. Dick. He talks about how he wrote this scene in Flow My Tears, the policeman said, which afterwards, after he wrote that scene, he realized that it was a rewriting of a moment in the Acts of the Apostles. Okay, fine, all right, maybe a coincidence. But then a few years after that, he finds himself stopping at a gas station, and he starts reenacting this very scene from his book. He says, a careful study of my novel showed that for reasons I cannot begin to explain, I had managed to retell several of the basic incidents from a particular book of the Bible, and even had the right names. What could explain this? That was 4 years ago that I discovered all this. For 4 years I have tried to come up with a theory, and I have not. I doubt I ever will. But The mystery had not ended there as I imagined. 2 months ago, I was walking up to the mailbox late at night to mail off a letter and also to enjoy the sight of St. Joseph's Church, which sits opposite my apartment building. I noticed a man loitering suspiciously by a parked car. It looked as if he was attempting to steal the car, or maybe something from it. As I returned from the mailbox, the man hid behind a tree. On impulse, I walked up to him and asked, "Is anything the matter?" "I'm out of gas," the man said, "and I have no money." So what he goes on to describe is basically this scene from the Bible, and his novel, Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, is now being reenacted for him in real life. There's this kind of like cyclical, recurring nature where art colonizes life, colonizes art. Like it's this real porous nature of reality that Philip K. Dick is describing. And I think that there's a lot of comparison to what's going on in this Borges story.
I think there's another big one too, exactly what you were saying in his, I think it's 1977 Met speech. It might have been 1970, pretty sure 77. Philip K. Dick, goes on a long rant, which people all called him crazy for, but then looking back on it is actually quite interesting. And he has the idea of the light switch in there. He also has the idea of painters. And so in this kind of, in the master's house, there are these servants who change the paintings and they run out of paintings. So eventually they just start making little different like changes on the painting. But then the master might look at it and say, "This looks slightly different from yesterday, but almost exactly the same." It makes me think of the idea of the different, Bible story becoming a story in his novel, becoming a real story in his life. The gradation, the relationship seems to be very fuzzy. So it's like what caused what. You can't even tell what where the levels of causation are or how they relate to each other. It's just like, changing little blur by little color by little shape on that painting. Another thing that's really similar too is that Borges warns that the creators of this world are chess masters, not angels. And that's very similar to Philip K. Dick too, because he talks about the programmer and the anti-programmer being blind and just playing to bother the programmer, playing a infinite game of chess. Because Borges says this: "Contact with Tlön, the habit of Tlön, has disintegrated this world. Spellbound by Tlön's rigor, humanity has forgotten and continues to forget that it is the rigor of chess masters, not of angels." Again, very similar to PKD.
I think if I had to compare the two, though, I would say with PKD, he truly believes that what he is writing is a description of reality as it is. And, the more videos I watch of Borges, the more I feel like for him, I feel like what he's doing is a kind of like game. He's creating a kind of like elaborate crossword, not crossword puzzle, or he's doing a crossword. He's filling in. Yeah, I don't know what word game I'm going to compare this to, but he's building something with words. You know what I mean? And he treats it as a kind of game. And as I was rereading it, I came across this line, which I hadn't noticed before, but it's at the very beginning. He says, "Bioy Cazares had dinner with me that evening, and we became lengthily engaged in a vast polemic concerning the composition of a novel in the first person, whose narrator would omit or disfigure the facts and indulge in various contradictions which would permit a few readers, very few readers, to perceive an atrocious or banal reality." And it's like, is that like the skeleton key that unlocks what he's doing? Is that like a thesis statement here? Are we reading a bunch of disfigured facts and contradictions that are meant to confuse and disorient the overwhelming majority of readers, while just like the precious few can perceive some banal reality behind it? I'm not saying I perceive the banal reality behind it, but because it feels like when someone tells you a joke that has no punchline, but the joke itself is the fact that the punchline isn't there, like an anti-joke, that, and I don't know. This is a tough one, Bob. This is a tough fortune cookie to crack.
Oh. Cookies. Well, this, I think, first time comes out in English in 1961 in the collection Labyrinths. That's his most famous, at least in the U.S., it seems like the most famous collection that is a lot of stories that are similar to this Library of Babel. circular ruins. But he seems to like to make things that are labyrinthine, the stories themselves. And that's why this one fits into Labyrinths. Whether or not it's a game or if it's a way for him to craft really exquisite writing, or I guess why he's doing Labyrinths, I wish I could know. Maybe the book that comes out in a few months, we can find out why. But he's the absolute master of what he is doing. So I much enjoy the Labyrinth, even though I can not solve Wordle, let alone a Borgesian labyrinth.
Yeah. One of the Wordles in this that I was struggling with personally is, before I mentioned that he'll give you facts, or rather things that you're supposed to believe. I think the most discussed thing is how in the Southern Hemisphere, there's no nouns. So everything is verbing all the time. And then in the Northern Hemisphere, I believe there's no verbs. So everything is adjectiving all the time.
Yeah.
Which is very funny, but those are like true statements, in a sense. I'm reminded of something someone said to me recently, which was like, when men get together to talk, all they're doing is just reciting facts at each other, interesting things they've heard. And then they go, so that's kind of that thing. Hey, did you know that in the Southern Hemisphere, they believe this? Well, one of those things that's said relates to the Gnosticism that we've been kind of investigating. The idea of the visible universe. Well, okay, so I'll just read the quote. For one of those Gnostics, the visible universe was an illusion, or more precisely, a sophism. Mirrors and fatherhood are abominable because they multiply and disseminate that universe. So what he's doing here is he's giving a quote attributed to the Hesiarch of Uqbar. So one of those theologians, priests, in Uqbar. This is a supposedly true statement about an opinion, about a religious belief. So it's not a true statement about the nature of reality, but it is a true statement about a religious opinion. So we can understand the truth value of that. And in that sense, okay, but look at his name. He's the heresiarch. So he is a person who deals in heresy, heresiarch. He is the, presumably like someone preaching a heretical belief. So in that case, are we supposed to believe him or disbelieve him? Not only in regards to like what is orthodox in Uqbar, but also whether it's true, whether it applies to all universes. And I think that's also the question. Is this idea of the visible universe being an illusion, aside from whether it's, heresy or orthodox, which universes does it apply? Does it apply to, this world which is invented and then comes crashing into the world of the story? Or does it apply only to, certain layers of this world, or to our own now? When you set up these structures like this, where a statement can be true in many or all or none of the worlds presented, it becomes really, juicy. It's all juicy, Bob. It's all juicy.
Makes it feel like a bowling ball and I'm just a pin standing there, this idea. When you have the different layers that you were just talking about, and this idea of, okay, perhaps in this universe, the universe itself is just a trick. That's what this heresiarch is saying. That's one of our first introductions and insights into Uqbar. And that's the quote that BOA tells Borges and gets them interested. But if Tlön is actually taking over the world, which is happening 7 years after this story comes out in the postscript, then if that is the prevailing philosophy or the prevailing truth, then that truth will take over anything else that exists within the non-fictional element of the story, which of course is butted up against our own universe. So that's why I feel like, a bowling pin about to be struck down. Near the end in the postscript, he says that all the disciplines are being slowly replaced. And he says that, archaeology is gone, biology and mathematics are awaiting their next avatar. And then he says, a scattered dynasty of recluses has changed the face of the earth and their work continues. This is, of course, Orbis Tertius, this group of what started out as 300 and went on to potentially grow larger. He says, if my projections are correct, 100 years from now, someone will discover the 100 volumes of the Second Encyclopedia. Tlön. At that, French and English and mere Spanish will disappear from the earth. The world will be Tlön. So if that happens, and if more of these intrusions start happening, so the actual physical reality of Tlön, the fictional reality of Tlön becomes the physical reality in our own universe, so will the prevailing philosophies and physics. They might actually take over our world eventually, and have by the end of the postscript mostly. Yeah.
There's something very like Lovecraftian about this, like the kind of sense of like supernatural doom. I don't, though, to be honest with you, I don't quite get the sense that the world being taken over by Tlön is such a bad thing, but maybe that's my reality longing to yield, like it's like, maybe it's a bad thing in general, maybe it's a bad thing in principle, the idea of it, but it's like, he makes the world sound so interesting and so magical. I don't know if magical is the right word, but it's like there's such a charm about it, about this world that he's describing, that it feels like refreshing, like it feels like a never land that you can kind of want to escape to. And I think that he's playing with that. There's this one moment in there that kind of clued me into something like this. Herbert Ashe died of a ruptured aneurysm. A few days before, he had received a sealed and certified package from Brazil. It was a book in large octavo. Ashe left it at the bar where, months later, I found it. I began to leaf through it and experienced an astonished and airy feeling of vertigo, which I shall not describe, for this is not the story of my emotions, but of Uqbar and Tlön and Orbis Tertius. On one of the nights of Islam called the Night of Nights, the secret doors of heaven open wide, and the water in the jars becomes sweeter. If those doors opened, I would not feel what I felt that afternoon. The book was written in English and contained 1001 pages. On the yellow leather back, I read these curious words which repeated on the title page: A First Encyclopedia of Tlön, Volume 11, Hilaire to Janger. Okay, so this feeling he describes is kind of what I am gesturing towards. He experiences astonishment and airy feelings of vertigo as he's opening up this first encyclopedia of Tlön. And he brings out this image from seemingly nowhere on one of the nights of Islam called the Nights of Nights. The doors of heaven open and the water in the jars becomes sweeter. He's describing this kind of like Islamic religious experience, but he says just afterwards, he opens up the book and it contains 1001 pages. And anytime you have the number 1001, to me, it always invokes echoes of 1001 Arabian Nights. You know what I mean? So I feel like he's not, it's so hard to pin this down, but this chain of thought, I have the book, I open it and I feel this emotion. I'm going to tell you this thing about, this myth from Islam. I'm going to tell you the number 1001, and then I'm going to tell you the title of the book. It's like the most sidesteppy way to be like, this reading about Tlön is the same kind of fantastic feeling you read when you open up the 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. I don't know how else to pinpoint what he's doing here. I don't know. Do you think that, am I just grasping at straws here? But like, what do you think?
This is very pole crab of you, Zach. We read A Voyage to Arcturus. Paul Crabbe's attitude is, yeah, I know that everything is probably fake here, but it's fine. I can just go fishing. So he's going to live his life, even though everything seems to be absurd. I think while many of the things in Uqbar and in Tlön seem quite cool, especially I loved the idea of there being no word for moon, but the verb to moonate or mooning, or the adjective world, the adjective hemisphere, where it's just round, glowing, soft thing in air, something like that. But I think Borges is giving us kind of the cautionary side, and then ultimately siding with you and becoming pole crab, because he says this that I thought was very disturbing to me personally. He says, already Tlön's language has filtered into our schools. Already the teaching of Tlön's harmonious society has obliterated the history that governed my own childhood. Already a fictitious past has supplanted in men's memories that other past, of which we now know nothing. Certain, not even that it is false. So it's completely replaced our history, it's replaced our memory of the history, it's replaced anything that we've put down in record books, because it has just, by filtering through into our universe, has become so dense that what used to be in the universe no longer is there. But he does end up being very Paul Crabbian, because he says, it makes very little difference to me. Presumably Borges talking, or whoever has found this written this postscript 7 years in the future. He says, through my quiet days in this hotel in Droge, I go on revising an indecisive translation in the style of Quevedo of Sir Thomas Browne's Urn Burial. So he is just going to go and not fish, but translate a work that no one will probably read. So while it's disturbing and it's taking over everything, he has said, I'm just opting out and going to continue on little projects that matter to me.
This process of him revising a translation, what is the world doing but revising its own translation?
Yeah, that's
you know what
true.
I mean? He is an echo of what is happening to the world. And you already said that the things as they exist in this world of Tlön have to be kind of rewritten is the wrong word, adjusted, so that it can be accepted into this reality. And what is that but an act of translation? And, when you revise something, you scratch out sentences and write new sentences over them. It's Xing out part of this world and replacing it with something else of a different logic. I think that, I don't know. It's interesting how he makes a connection to National Socialism, to Marxism. I don't, any ideology. He lists a bunch of them. He lists a bunch of ideologies that are like what is happening here, because people so readily accepted these other ideological visions of the world. Of course, they're also going to accept Tlön, but to me, it doesn't seem like Tlön functions like an ideology. Or I guess I should say, it doesn't seem to me like he is denouncing the arrival of Tlön. Maybe that's what's interesting about this story, is he doesn't tell us what to think or how to think. There's no summary moment of like, and you better watch out for the Tlön in your world, kids, because not only are we left ambiguous about the arrival of Tlön, but our feelings of what Tlön is. I mean, we know how the author feels about Tlön, that feeling of vertigo, but it's not clear to me that we're being led down a certain path that we should feel a certain way about Tlön. I don't feel like I'm being manipulated into wanting Tlön into this world.
That's fair. I still feel very afraid of Tlön. He says, it's the rigor of chess masters, not of angels. It will replace your childhood. It will replace your memories. It will supplant human history. I think while he goes on to say, I'm going to continue revising this translation that I don't intend to publish, while this Tlön is publishing itself all over the place, while there is no direct run for your lives, Tlön is coming, it doesn't sound like it respects our lives at all. It's almost like we are just going to become like the batteries in the Matrix, for this machine. Tlön is going to make humans into batteries, because Tlön is going to take over our language. So all we can speak is Tlönian language. All we can think is Tlönian thought. So while it's not necessarily like the Black Iron Prison or something that's, really terrible, I don't even know enough to use that, but to say that it's like the bottom rung in PKD's idea of universes good versus bad. It's not at the bottom necessarily, but the idea of something steamrolling all that has come before it without any consideration for it, and then everyone else becoming mouthpieces for it. It reminds me a lot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where people are almost just raw material for the production of this other thing. And there, it's these aliens from where I forgot where they're from. And then here, it's just Tlön, the habits of Tlön, the philosophies of Tlön, the any discipline of Tlön is coming over and replacing each one step by step by step.
I think for me, I'm excited to read as much Borges as possible. Any excuse I can get in the future. But, with him, it's interesting because I'm not looking for meaning or what he has to say so much as I am looking for style. Like, it's like, I'm always interested in what he does and how he does it, I don't know. Let's keep our eye out for opportunities to keep reading him, I think.
The old story, I think it's Don DeLillo. He always kept a picture of Borges over his writing desk. I think someone asked him, like, have you ever read Borges? No. But he looks so serious. That's a real writer.
Yep. That's great. All right. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.